and we're proud to be your hosts for today's webinar. This webinar is organized by Think Ocean CUHK, one of the 100+ chapters worldwide. We're a youth environmental organization dedicated to promoting environmental awareness, policy change, and widespread engagement to protect Earth, and to provide a platform through which today's youth can become tomorrow's leaders. Our Earth has been facing multiple issues lately, and while certain social or environmental issues do not seem related to the business world at first glance, there are very clear impacts and consequences that emanate as a result of these issues, whether it be from the affected parties or from bystanders. What is being perceived by society inherently affects their decision making and hence the final choices that they would make. I am sure some of you or many of you have heard about certain trends in social media. For instance, using metal straws instead of plastic straws, or the decision to stop purchasing fast fashion and to upcycle clothes more. These trends do stem from many intertwining issues, and collectively, the voices of everyone do impact how a business acts and responds, which leads me to the main topic of today, sustainable finance. We're very lucky and pleased to introduce our speaker for today, an expert at this topic, to further tell us about sustainable finance and also recent trends in the Greater China region today, Mr. Brian Ho, who is the partner of climate change and sustainability services at Ernst & Young, and who has more than 18 years of experience in consulting, specifically in sustainability and ESG. Enough talking from me, and I'll pass it on to Brian to start his presentation. Take the lead, Brian.
Sure, thank you. Good evening. This is Brian Ho from EY. So EY, as you may know, is so-called one of the big four accounting firms. But of course, we don't only work on audit, but for other services as well. And sustainability, as mentioned by the host, is a hot topic, no matter from a global perspective or from a capital market perspective. So that's why today I would like to share with you the global trend on sustainable finance and also its trend in the Greater China region. So to start with, let me give you a brief introduction on the global trends and what we are talking about today on sustainable finance. So as you can imagine, the whole financial system in the past, we invest our capital in and ask for return, and then companies will go bigger. So this is a very traditional type of profit maximization way of looking at the whole financial system. But on the other hand, we are seeing that in the past, due to the emphasis on the growth, somehow we are sacrificing different environmental and social resources, no matter from the pollution perspective or the kind of underdevelopment of different countries in different regions, the poor labor conditions of workers. So a lot of issues that raise out during the process that we overemphasize on the economic return. And that's why it also creates a scenario that the current environmental and social situation will also have some kind of an impact on the sustainability of the business as well as the sustainability of the whole of our world. So that's why the term sustainable finance comes out, and also it's a kind of a fine-tune or a concept or adjusted concept how we should think about the whole financial system. So when we talk about sustainable finance, there are a couple of terms that we may need to look at, and the most important terms, of course, is ESG, environmental, social, and governance. So when we talk about sustainable finance, is how we integrate this type of environmental, social, and governance factors, ESG factors, into the whole process, the whole financial process. No matter investment, equity investment, no matter lending by bank, no matter on insurance, so on every single part of the financial system, how we integrate ESG into that. And when we talk about ESG, actually, it's not a really new concept because in the past, business talk about corporate social responsibility or sustainability or terms like corporate citizenship. But somehow ESG, the term ESG is more direct. So you can imagine under environmental, we talks about resources usage, environmental footprint, innovation, green innovation. On social, no matter from the internal aspect, I mean labor standard, labor protection, health and safety, how to retain your talent. From external perspective, how you manage your supply chain, how you ensure that your products are safe, and also how you engage with the communities. And the governance part are more direct. How accountable is your board of directors, different types of issues. So from the capital market perspective, ESG is more like how companies can manage their risks and also explore opportunities in terms of ESG. So comparing with terms like corporate social responsibility is more direct and it's more quantifiable. So quantifiable is a core for the whole financial system, because when any investors want to make an investment based on ESG, they somehow they also need to show that this ESG investment can create value. It's not only about something doing good or based on their own interests, but it need to demonstrate how ESG investment can create benefit to their client, to their shareholders, and then for more sustainable growth. So that's why the topic of ESG is really hot here. I mean, in Hong Kong, in the Greater China region, or around the world, is a hot topic in the last couple of years. And also it attracted attention from the business world. No matter your asset owners, your asset managers, your companies, your rating agencies, your stock exchange, everyone talks about ESG. Due to this trend, we can see that there are so-called ecosystem on ESG are being created. Because if we look at, no matter, I mean, we look at the financial system, there are different players, right? For example, we have different, let's say, asset owners, we have asset managers, we have banks, or we have insurer, different types of financial institutions. And they will put money in for return. I mean, they will invest in different types of companies, no matter listed companies or private companies, or they want to invest in or create different types of financial products that are related to sustainable finance or ESG. So a kind of like ecosystem is created, and we can see that the motivation or the pressure from one side will create kind of an impact on the other side. So here I would like to use, for example, equity investment for an example. We all know that, for example, in Hong Kong, there are around 2,600 something or 2,700 listed companies, and they attract capital from different parts of the world, no matter local investors or global investors. So, of course, during the process of investment, as the topic of ESG is getting more and more attention, the investors somehow in the past, of course, they mainly look at the return. I mean, the valuation of the market value of the company, the return of that investment. But somehow ESG becomes another factor that they will look at when they do their investment process. For example, they will regularly review the ESG performance of companies in their portfolios, and if those investees are not doing good, they will engage with them or even divest from those companies. So that's why it will create some kind of pressure, I mean, on listed companies, because those investors are asking for more information, asking those listed companies to put more resources on the management of ESG. and it creates some kind of interactions on this and between these two. On the other hand, if we take Hong Kong as an example, because we have a lot of international investors that are using Hong Kong as a trade platform to get more financial return. So regulators, especially for example the SFC or the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, they need to respond to the expectation of the investors, because investors are asking for more ESG information. And that's why regulators also need to think how we can encourage the listed companies in Hong Kong to do more on ESG. And that's why they will have regulatory requirements on the listing rules to require companies, no matter to publish ESG report or have a stronger internal ESG management. On the other hand, investors, because you can imagine some big asset managers like BlackRock, like Vanguard, like JP Morgan, they have many funds, they have many portfolios. They can't really assess the company one by one. I mean, if you have a chance to look at the company's ESG report, is huge. I mean, it's over 15 to 100 pages. I mean, for those investors, they don't have the time, and they need to make their investment decision really quick, so they cannot look at the report one by one. But on the other hand, they can rely on the information provider in the market, like some rating agencies that you may have heard of, Standard & Poor's, MSCI, or some information provider like Bloomberg. So they all have products or database related to ESG and sell those data to investors. So they will rate companies or list the companies' ESG performance by looking at their publicly available data, their website, their ESG report, or sending them questionnaires. So that's why for listed companies, when they exist or when they need to face different expectations from stakeholders on ESGs, they need to think about, on one hand, how to make sure that they can fulfill the regulatory requirements, but on the other hand, they need to engage with their investors to tell them how good they are in terms of managing those ESG issues and also explore opportunities. And on the other hand, they need to communicate frequently with those ESG rating providers. So that's why in the last few years, we can see that on sustainable finance, this kind of ecosystem are being created, and its influence is getting bigger and bigger. I mean, no matter in Hong Kong and in nearby countries like, for example, like no matter in mainland China, in Japan, in Korea, and Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia. I mean, most of the Asian countries, this kind of trend is happening. I mean, as exchanges are asking for mandatory disclosure requirement for listed companies on ESG, more and more international investors as well as local investors, they are now having more requests on companies on ESG because their clients ask them to do so, and there are more and more rating agencies as well. So in such sense, this ecosystem really can create some impact to influence companies' performance or how they see ESG, because in the past there's no such ecosystem, and company will say, okay, well, I'll prepare a ESG report just for compliance purpose. But now somehow you can imagine money talks, right? So if our investor asks the company to do so, they need to respond. At least they need to do something. So it really creates some kind of a momentum in terms of how business think about sustainability in the longer run. So, of course, when we talk about sustainable finance, well, as mentioned, there are several types of players in the whole system. No matter asset managers or asset owners, And internationally, there are some trends that are encouraging asset owners and asset managers when they do their equity investment. They need to look at sustainability or ESG. For example, under the United Nations, there are so-called principles for responsible investment. It is a kind of a signatory type of principles that asset owners and asset managers can sign. I mean, sign as a signatory, and then once they sign as a signatory, they need to comply with those responsible principles, those 10 principles during the investment process, and they also need to have a public disclosure on how they integrate ESG into their whole investment process. By June last year, actually, there are more than 3,000 biggest asset owners and also investment managers sign up as a UNPRI signatories. So big brand names like what I mentioned, BlackRock, JP Morgan, HSBC, Vanguard, I mean, you name it, I mean, all the big ones. And there are also around 40 UNPRI signatories in China as well. Some big brands like Ping An, also Legend Capitals, the China Life. So this trend is coming. I mean, this trend is coming. And what are the implications behind? And as mentioned, more than 3,000 signatories in the world, and they are representing 103.4 trillion US dollar AUM. Of course, I mean, this is a figure that we can't really imagine. I mean, it's huge. But if we look at the trend in the last 15 years, you can see that the trend on sustainable investment is really booming. I mean, in terms of the number of signatories and number of AUM under the UNPRI is really booming. And just really, I mean, the situation that we are facing, that my team is facing. I've met so many managers and senior consultants left because they're being hired by those financial institutions. So all the FIs are looking at how to integrate ESG into their investment process and then think about new products, and they need people. So that's why we are seeing that the market is really booming. Of course, you may wonder why investors are so eager on ESG. Of course, the most important reason is ESG investment can perform as well as or better than traditional investment. There are lots of academic studies, because I believe that most of you are students. There are lots of academic studies showing the positive correlation between ESG performance and financial performance. And besides from academic studies, different stock exchanges and also rating agencies find the same results. For example, a research report by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange shows that those companies who are included as a constituent of those ESG indices, in long term, their annual return, the annual financial return are higher than those who are not in those indices. So for ESG investment, you can imagine, because there's so many type of investors. They are not like hedge funds or I mean those investors only look at short-term value. But many of those, especially those asset managers, they're serving clients like pension fund or university education fund or some sovereignty fund. Those funds or those clients, they really want some more sustainable and long-term return and also minimize the risk. And somehow ESG is a risk for companies, and this is a reason why they will request their fund managers to look at ESG investment. And in longer term, if those companies can manage ESG risk well, they can also create a longer term economic and business sustainability. So this is how all the figures or all the research are showing a positive correlation. So this is a one by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And for EY, we also do kind of a global survey on sustainability as well. I mean, how investors are looking at sustainability. And we started the survey since 2013 and until now. So every year we will kind of ask the global 600 biggest investors how or whether they will integrate ESG into their investment process. And you can see that in 2013, only around 72% of the investors said they will integrate. And now more than 89% said they will integrate ESG into their investment process. So in such case, you can imagine, I mean, companies are facing a lot of pressure, right? Because ESG is a really new topics, but on the other hand, they also need to tackle the expectation or meet the expectations of the investors. So that's why in the market, there are lots of different types of analysts, no matter internal analysts or by those investors or analysts by different rating agencies or information provider. There are common questions that they will assess companies whether they are doing good or not in terms of ESG. They will look at companies' annual reports or their annual ESG reports, which if you are interested, you can go to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange database and download the ESG reports of different companies and have a look. They will also look at other types of controversy. We call it controversy. For example, in the media, traditional media, social media, whether there's any negative controversial stories or information of that companies. And then they will also look at some ESG rating provider, MSCI, S&P, something like that. So the public information of the companies are being observed and assessed. And what are the criteria, how we determine whether these companies are doing good or not on ESG? There are several major criteria. For example, whether the business is well governed. This is mainly focusing on the corporate governance side, especially whether the companies have a mechanism or some governance body who can effectively monitor ESG risk. Because ESG is so a new topic. So if you're familiar with how a listed companies or a company work, the board of directors, the role of the board of directors is to do monitoring and also provide resources or strategy to the company's management on different types of issues. In the past, ESG is not a hot topic. Most of the companies may not have such dedicated mechanism or governance body to look at ESG. But now everyone is talking about ESG, and it has really some impact on the companies. So whether the board can effectively monitor those risks is the criteria that investors will assess. And also, what are the key performance indicators by the company and how companies define their ESG risk? Because this is very important, as you can imagine. ESG risk for a property developers is completely different to those chained restaurants, right? For example, for companies like I can't mention companies' name, but for chain restaurants, their major ESG risk may comes from food safety. Something like food, or kind of a raw material sourcing or kind of a food packaging, something like that. But for real estate developers, their major ESG risk may come from health and safety during the construction, green building, or whether their building or their property management can be energy saving, something like that. So different issues. So how the companies manage those issues that are most materials to their operations as well as their financial performance, it is something that the investors will look at when they do the investment process. It's not about companies donating how much money to an NGOs and make them look good. It is useless. I mean, in the world of sustainable finance, it's more like how they can manage those risks in a very effective way, and also explore opportunities. Taking real estate companies as an example, Health and safety, of course, is a risk to the company, right? If we are managing health and safety bad, maybe there's some work injuries, and the companies need to do compensation to the injured workers. On the other hand, green building, energy saving is an opportunity for the companies, because all the energies related to the cost. If I'm a developer that I say I commit to net zero or carbon neutral, so I somehow, on one hand, I can reduce my emission, but on the other hand, I'm saving costs as well. So from the investor's perspective, they want to look at that rather than taking good pictures after donating money. It is not ESG. It's only some kind of a PR campaign. So risks and opportunities are very important, and more importantly, ESG is not only limited to the company's operation itself, but also to the stakeholders. Take a very simple example. For example, if you are using Apple, or you are wearing a pair of Nike, I think everyone knows that Nike doesn't own their own factory, right? Apple doesn't own their own factory. They just own the brand, own the design. They will just ask those suppliers, those factories, to do the outsource the production to them. But does it mean that Apple or Nike don't need to take care of their supply chain? No, they also need to take care of their supply chain, because their major risks come from the manufacturing part, which is their business partner, is their suppliers. So somehow, when we in the world of ESG, it's not only about their own operation, but the extended responsibilities, how they can engage different key stakeholders across their value chain and manage those risks in an effective way. It is also very important. So how companies identify key stakeholders, engage with the stakeholders, and mitigate the risks, explore the opportunities on ESG, it is something that's very important in the world of sustainable finance, how investors or financial institutions are assessing companies' ESG performance. And of course, there are other trends as well. For example, the international societies are talking a lot on the UN SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which investors are also are in favor of companies aligning their sustainability strategies with UN SDGs as well. Even some companies, they will issue bonds, so-called UN SDG bonds as well, because among the 17 UN SDGs, there should be something that companies can do. On one hand, to create value for the society, for the world, and also create business value for themselves. So it's something like a concept that I believe some of you may have heard, is creating shared value, how the shared value can be created and also the companies can adjust their products, their services, or even their business model to help to assist the world to tackle some common challenges. But on the other hand, they can make their business, make a sustainable growth of their business. So this is also a topic that the whole financial sustainable finance world are talking about. Yeah, so this is the very quick introduction of the whole financial system in terms of sustainability. And another topic, because I believe that our environment is also a hot topic to most of the investors as well. So especially topics on climate change is a really hot topic that every investors, financial institutions are looking at. Climate change actually before 2017, according to our global investors survey, is not a hot topic. But now most of the financial institutions, they put a lot of emphasis on climate change, because we are really seeing that climate change create impact on ourselves, no matter on human behavior, on human living, or on business. Extreme weather, extreme heat, frequent typhoon, sea level rise, and as well as due to this kind of risk, the different regulators, for example, China, Chairman Xi mentioned the 2060 carbon neutral goal of China. So there will be a lot of transformation or new regulations coming out related to carbon. So these are all the physical and also the transition risks that brought by climate change to companies. Companies need to deal with that. For example, in the future, if there's a more extreme weather, extreme heat, or more typhoon, as a property developer, how I can manage my projects, how I can have for example, whether my building, the building structure, the building materials are strong enough to have resilience towards those risks. On the other hand, whether I should change my energy structure, because in the future, maybe traditional type of energy will become more and more expensive. There are all kind of issues like that will affect the business kind of operation. And investors are also aware of that. So that's why they also need companies to think clearly what are the major ESG risks, that major climate risks that will have impact on business, and how they are mitigating that. That's why internationally we are seeing that there are more and more investors. They line up together. For example, there are initiatives called Climate Action 100 Plus. They are focusing on the top 100 biggest emitter in the world. I mean, the companies. More than 370 investors from 28 markets line up together, and they send open letter to the CEO of those companies, which they ask companies to have a stronger governance structure on climate change, to force them to reduce carbon emission across the value chain, and also have regular disclosures. And this investor are representing over 33 trillion US dollars AUM. For example, Chinese companies like China Petrol, companies like that, they're facing a lot of pressure from this type of investors, because for example, that energy sector, oil and gas, they are big emitters. So, but investors are asking for that, they need to respond. So we are seeing that in the financial market, I mean, investors are lining up together already. And 2 weeks ago, actually, 3 weeks ago, actually, there's a piece of news that big investors like BlackRock and Vanguard and 40 asset managers line up together, and they will start to ask their investees for net zero very soon. So this is a really, really big change, because in the past we can't really imagine those asset managers, they're so proactive in terms of climate change. But now, because the whole landscape is changing, and they also recognize that climate change will bring a big, really, really big impact to business. So that's why no matter the joint initiatives between investors, and also there are different types of reporting framework or initiatives to make companies disclose their information on climate change and how it can be linked to financial performance. Because in the past, you can imagine when companies talk about sustainability or ESG, they are very silo, right? It's not really linked together. But now investors are expecting companies to think more in an integrated approach. How sustainability, how climate change affect your business, and how those figures are being reflected in your financial disclosure or public disclosure. So there are different types of initiative like this task force for climate-related financial disclosure. This is a pretty new thing in the last 3 years. And there are more and more companies are adopting that, and different rating agencies are also adopting climate resilient models to assess companies as well. But of course, these are only from the risk perspective. But from the opportunities perspective, if you are doing good, you can also use your capacity on environmental management or climate resilience to raise some fund as well. For example, we can see that there are different new green financing channel, green bond, sustainable bonds, green loan or sustainable linked loan. These are all the new financial instruments that no matter banks or other types of financial institutions are exploring, or companies can also issue bonds as well. For example, in Hong Kong, there are a couple property developers like New World Development, like Swire Properties, like Linkwick. They have already issued green bonds using their projects that they have integrated green building into their projects. And they can demonstrate in the longer term how this green building can create environmental impact and also business return to the companies. So they can use this to issue a green bond to raise fund in the market. So this is not only about doing bad, you're facing risk, but also doing good, you can also explore opportunities. So, so just quickly touch on no matter global or in China. So actually, China is really catching up in the whole sustainable finance progress. If we look at the development of China's green finance, in China we mainly use the term green finance rather than sustainable finance. But of course, the term green is a broader sense of it's not only an environment, but I mean, we can say that green is equal to sustainable, but somehow the Chinese government will use the term green. So in terms of green finance in China, it has only developed in the last 4 to 5 years. But until now, if we look at different figures, for example, the green bond market, in only 4 years, within 4 years' time, China remains the second largest green bond market globally. The first one is US, of course, but the second one is China. So only three to 4 years time. So you can imagine. So what's the implication what's the implication behind is the Chinese government invests a lot on encouraging financial institutions and companies to look at green or sustainability or ESG. So due to the time limit, I'm a bit overrun, but just quickly go through another initiative in China. For example, in China 3 years ago, the Chinese government has a really comprehensive kind of a roadmap or structure on how green financial system can be established in China. There's a so-called guidelines on the construction of green financial system in China since 2016. And that's why I say that it is a very, very comprehensive document, because it covers all the aspects of a financial system in terms of implementing sustainability or green. For example, develop green lending when a company asks a bank for a loan. So environmental performance, sustainability will add as a kind of a assessment criteria. Enhance the role of the security markets in supporting green investment, no matter ESG equity investment, like assessing companies' ESG performance. It is something that the CSRC or the Shanghai and Shenzhen Stock Exchange are doing at the moment. Launch green development funds and mobilize social capital through PPP. So as mentioned, a lot of funded programs are supporting companies to do the transformation on the environmental management. Green insurance, of course, is also a new topic, and different types of instruments, green bond, green loan, or instrument. And also there are already some pilot programs in 9 cities, in 9 regions in China on green finance already, and international collaboration in green finance, and also on very important, how to prevent financial risk and prevent greenwashing in terms of more and more green projects coming out. So you can see that this is really a really comprehensive approach by the Chinese government in adopting or in tackling the green finance trend globally. And of course, as mentioned, after the announcement of 2060 carbon neutral goal, there are already a lot of laws and regulations or guidelines coming out. For example, emission trading scheme, national emission trading scheme in China will be launched very soon. a lot of stuff going on. So yeah, so you can see the commitment or the efforts by the Chinese government on this aspect, because it is a really critical topics to China in the last 40 years after the openness of the China market. I mean, there's some sacrification. I mean, we sacrifice a bit. I mean, in terms of environmental and social costs. But now it's time to readjust the way that how to make a sustainable growth or development of the whole country. So you can see the commitment of the Chinese government. Yeah, so there are a bit other contents on there, but due to the time, I think I will just stop here and do my conclusion. So as mentioned, we are seeing that there are lots of stuff going on, no matter globally, in China, in Hong Kong. So there are what are the implications to business? On one hand, we companies need to think more about on governance, how they can make their governance bodies, no matter board of directors or management, to become more accountable on these issues, how they can create internal management on ESG, how they disclose and be more transparent on this aspect. And more importantly, it is not only a silo thing. Sustainability is not a silo thing, but it should be integrated in the company's risk management and other types of risk management as well. Yeah, and also how they explore opportunities, how they expand product offerings, and work with the financial institutions on ESG or sustainability. It is another topic that companies can explore in the future. Yeah, so I'll just stop here and we'll see if you have any questions or comments. And thank you very much for your time.
Yep. Thank you so much, Mr. Brian. I hope you have all enjoyed this amazing presentation. Now, Mr. Brian will answer some questions that were sent to us during the presentation. A quick reminder that you are welcome to ask questions, and you can do so by typing in the chat box or the Q&A menu in your control panel. And it can also be anonymous. So for our first question that we have, how can students stay up to date with ESG issues, especially in finance?
Yeah, it's a good question, and somehow I think the information on sustainable finance is quite overwhelming. I mean, a lot of information in the market, and of course, as a student, you can sign up with there's quite numbers of regular seminars or events on there, and there's and different organizations like what I mentioned, the UNPRI. Or different agencies, they have regular newsletters. So you can feel free to sign up to those and then read the newsletter, and then you can kind of know what's going on. I mean, in this area. But of course, if you have time, your spare time, you can also see whether you can have some internship in different organizations specializing on sustainable finance or ESG as well. So I think it should be the most direct way that you can really understand what's really going on. I mean in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Brian, for answering that question. The next question is, do you think sustainability can ever truly be achieved in the finance sector, or is the nature of finance too unsustainable in nature?
Oh, it's a good question. So I think it really depends on the levels of the effort by the regulators as well. Because if the regulators are asking companies to do more, to ask the financial institutions to do more, I believe that it can really shift the development as well. For example, in Hong Kong, we are seeing that the Hong Kong MA, the SFC, and the stock exchange, they all have different initiatives to encourage financial institutions, investors on looking at climate change and sustainability right now. So I think if we can set the regulatory kind of requirement higher, and those payers need to follow that. So I think it is Yeah, so I think somehow it can be achieved, but of course the most important part is that whether the awareness of the general public, or even, for example, like I'm a kind of individual customers, or when as if I want to, as a consumer, I want to invest in the stock market. If I prefer to look at some more ESG funds or ESG ETF, and if this kind of a market demand is created, I believe that from a market perspective, those financial institutions, they will have more products on there. So on one hand, of course, we rely on the regulators' pressure, but on the other hand, as a general public, we also need to raise their awareness on this.
All right, thank you for the answer, Mr. Brian, and we hope that answers your question. And so for our next question, do you think green investments are a bubble?
It's a good question. It's a good question. It really depends on how you define a bubble. If we are seeing some pressing issues or some global challenges that we really need to solve, and the regulators and the business, they have different initiatives or have some new requirements on that, and the financial system follows those trends and see who are doing good on tackling those challenges and evaluate their value on doing so. I don't think it is a bubble. The only chance that it becomes a bubble is just it kind of we just make it as a slogan, and also in some case that it become another way of greenwashing, so it will become a bubble. But it is also the reason why when we talk about sustainable finance, green finance, another condition is how we prevent those greenwashing happen. How we assess the impact of those green projects, rather than just say, oh, we are very green, and then raise some funds. So I think as long as we can prevent that happen, I think it shouldn't be a bubble.
All right, looks like we have answered all your questions. So Mr. Brian, is there anything else that you would like to cover before we wrap up?
I'm good, but I really appreciate the chance today, and I believe that all of you here are quite, interested in this topic. And please feel free to stay connected. And then if you, as mentioned, we also recruit internship and also full-time colleagues. So if you are interested in the future, let me know, and then we can explore any chance to work together.
All right. Thank you again, Mr. Brian, for answering those questions and for your insightful sharing. It was very much a pleasure to have you with us. So this concludes our webinar. On behalf of ThinkOcean, thank you all for joining us today. And we hope you have learned and enjoyed this webinar as much as we do. And we hope to see you all on our next webinar. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.